Breaking this morning, the European Union says it is putting its retaliatory measures against the U.S. on hold after President Trump backed down first and paused his tariff plan for 90 days. The president of the European Commission said the pause is, quote, an important step towards stabilizing the global economy. European markets all solidly higher this morning. A lot of green there. Let's get right to CNN's Melissa Bell live in Paris. And, you know, the EU is basically taking a little bit of a victory lap, saying this is what happens when we stick together.
That's right, and hoping to stay unified on this. And what's interesting about their response to this 90-day pause, John, is not just that they're pausing what they were planning to do with regard to the reciprocal tariffs, which has been paused, but they're also stopping the rest of their responses. So, for instance, American tariffs on steel and aluminium of 25% remain on European companies. Europeans agreed yesterday on their response to that. They've decided to pause rolling out that response. American tariffs on the automobile and auto parts industry remain on Europe. For now, Europeans are also holding back. So a lot of restraint really being shown by the European Union here. They've really stopped all of the measures, both the ones they'd agreed on and the ones they were considering for now. Have a listen to what the Spanish Prime Minister had to say in response.
Nobody wins a trade war. Everybody loses. For this, the measure announced by the US administration, pending review of the exact details, seemed like an open door for negotiation, and as such to an agreement between countries.
So Europeans hopeful that negotiations can be reached, that negotiations can begin on all of these matters, but they also explain that they're going to continue to work together to look at very firm measures on both the automobile tariffs and the so-called reciprocals, so that if in 90 days, when that period comes to an end, should the American ones kick in, the Europeans should be ready to respond, and to respond very harshly, as we discussed yesterday. But for now, very much looking to see whether this pause equals the beginning of negotiations.
Yeah, this is very much a case of what happens next. Melissa Bell in Paris today. Thanks so much for being with us.
Trump's reversal led to an historic surge on Wall Street yesterday. U.S. markets, though, right now, let's take a look. Well, I'm going to go this direction. They are not in surge territory, if you will. Futures are down across the board. The White House is spinning this as all a kind of big win and part of a grand strategy by President Trump. Others, though, are saying that, well, he caved, he backtracked, and he retreated on demands that only he made, and a self-inflicted wound. The nation's biggest bank, J.P. Morgan Chase, is still sounding the alarm, even in the face of this move by Donald Trump about a possible recession this year. CNN's Zain Asher here with us now to talk about, and there has been a lot. I mean, what happens next is where everyone's mind has to be, especially when we're looking at futures like this. I mean, what is expected now with this U-turn, backtrack, and buckling of President Trump?
So I spoke to one analyst last night who said to me, can we please have a normal day on the markets?
No.
Just one normal day, because we have earned it. Looking at where futures stand right now, the last I checked, Dow was down about 500 points or so. I'm going to guess, Kate, that today is not going to be that day.
Yeah.
Now that everyone has had an opportunity to really sort of sober up and digest what we saw yesterday, I mean, obviously everyone has gotten over the shock, positive shock, but the shock of Donald Trump pausing these tariffs for 90 days. But now that everyone's had a chance to sort of sober up, the reality is setting in. You look at the facts. We're seeing a 10% tariff still on most parts of the world.
That's still historically high.
That is still historically high.
Yeah.
And on top of that, 25% tariff on steel, on aluminum, on autos as well, and not to mention the minor detail of triple-digit tariffs on China, with whom we import about $400 billion worth of goods every single year. What I think is really interesting is that you look at Dow futures, they're obviously down. You contrast that with what's happening with European stocks. If you could just pull up European stocks, squarely in the green. That's obviously because they're reacting to the 90-day pause, but also the fact that Europe is saying that they're not going to retaliate anymore. What I think is also interesting is what's happening with Asia stocks. Obviously, you would anticipate that the Asian stocks who are seeing tariff relief, so we could just pull up Asia as well, the Asian stocks that are seeing tariff reliefs, for example, the Nikkei, up about 9%. But Kate, check this out. Even the Shanghai Composite, right, Chinese stocks, also rallying despite the 125% tariff increase. And that indicates to me that Chinese investors saw what Donald Trump did yesterday and are saying to themselves, well, look, this kind of indicates that if the pain is great enough for Americans, be it investors or perhaps later consumers, that Donald Trump is willing to back down, that he is willing to negotiate. So that's why the Shanghai Composite ended the day there in the green.
And on that, that's why there's been a lot of really interesting reporting about how China has been preparing for this for a long time and is ready to unleash even more pain as it could be a very long fight. What are China's options?
Okay, so a couple of things. This time yesterday, we saw China in the same boat pretty much as the rest of the world. They had a little bit more pain inflicted on them compared to everyone else, but they were more or less in the same boat. Now they are completely isolated, and that is a strategy deliberately designed by Donald Trump to make the Chinese regret retaliating. In terms of who blinks first, whether it's going to be Donald Trump, whether it's going to be Xi Jinping, Kate, your guess is as good as mine. But what I will say is that we've talked a lot on this show about American consumers and the fact that they are going to suffer in all of this. What I think is also important to note is that the Chinese economy has been suffering for quite some time. They're dealing with slower growth, slower GDP. They have a real estate market crunch. They're dealing with a demographic crisis when it comes to declining population. So there's a lot of pressure on Xi Jinping. This decision by him of how to respond to this is just as much economic as it is political. The good news, as you talked about, Xi Jinping has had time to prepare. We saw this coming, of course. But they have a controlled economy. So they have levers that they can pull in order to shield their economy from tariffs. So, for example, they're already devaluing the currency just to make their exports a little bit cheaper. And that's why we're seeing Asian markets, especially the Shanghai Composite, rallying on the hope that perhaps there is going to be a deal here.
Yeah, so who has the upper hand in this, we'll call it a chess match right now, and we will see more evidence of that today.
We'll see.
It's great to see you, Zain. Thank you so much. John.
All right, joining us now, Jason Furman, the former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors and now a professor of economic policy practice at the Harvard Kennedy School. Professor, thanks so much for being with us. So is this a case now of no harm, no foul, the tumult over?
Absolutely not. This is above and beyond what the president campaigned on doing. And at the time, most people discounted those threats and thought he'd only fulfill part of them. Tariffs are still very, very high, and we're about to start seeing it in the real economy, in the prices that families pay, in the layoffs that companies are going to be doing.
All the reporting, it was the bond market that spooked the president and forced his hand, led him to blink here. Can you explain, for all of us who may not have taken Act 10, exactly what was happening with the bond market and if those fears are still over, or fears are still existent, I should say?
Yeah, normally when you're going into a downturn, you would think that the Fed is going to cut interest rates and interest rates are going to come down. But what was really scary was that interest rates were going way up. And that's because investors around the world, reportedly some of them in Japan, but around the world and in the United States, were more nervous about the United States. They didn't trust our country. They didn't want to lend to our country. And because of that, that made interest rates go up, just like any other borrower who's not particularly creditworthy is going to end up with higher interest rates.
In the New York Times reporting that the president knows what that means as someone who worked in real estate. When interest rates start going up, it just gets harder to do business. What do you think China sees here? We just heard from Zain Asher on this. Do you think they see this as a chance now to talk? Do they feel isolated, or do they see now that the president will blink when facing certain pressures?
The president has shown over and over again a willingness to blink. In his first term with China, when he would negotiate deals with them, it was largely deals about how to not escalate further rather than to de-escalate. But now we're starting from triple-digit tariffs on China in the United States, nearly 100% tariffs on the United States in China. It's really, really hard to picture how either of our economies will be able to function, deliver job gains, deliver benefits to consumers in the midst of a very, very extreme trade war. So some which way, someone's going to need to blink, or else we're both going into recession.
Talk to me about what you are looking for, I guess, in the next hours and days. Everything's moving so quickly here. There's so many twists. But what are the next shoes that could drop in your mind?
I mean, to me, it's number one, are we hearing about more new tariffs? The president has talked about tariffs on pharmaceuticals, on semiconductors, on lumber. Is he still talking about those new tariffs? Number two, that 10% on every country in the world, that's pretty high. That goes on all our friends and foes alike, with the exception of Russia, which doesn't get it. Is that there to stay, or is that part of the negotiation? And then number three, what's happening with China?